What if the scariest thing about the Griffin incident isn't the ghost, isn't the body horror, isn't even the ship itself? What if it's the fact that when the crew of the USS Griffin died, they didn't die at the hands of some alien monster. They died at the hands of each other. And by the end of this episode, that same fate almost caught up with La'an, Spock, and Kirk too. If you just watched the Griffin incident, you're probably left with more questions than answers, and that's by design. But there are 3 questions worth digging into properly, because the show buried real clues underneath the scares. Who or what was Rose Harper actually? What actually happened to the 300 people aboard the Griffin 9 years ago? And why does this thing seem to have unfinished business with La'an specifically, even after everyone beamed to safety? Let's start with the ship itself, because that's where the real horror begins, long before Kirk, Spock, and La'an ever set foot on board. 9 years is a long time for a starship to just vanish. No wreckage, no distress calls, no explanation. Then suddenly it reappears, powered, breathing oxygen, holding gravity, with artificial systems running that should have died with the crew that maintained them. That alone should have been the first warning sign. A ship doesn't keep its lights on for nearly a decade, with nobody aboard to flip the switch. Something was maintaining the Griffin. Something wanted it found, or at least wanted the right people to find it. When La'an, Spock, and Kirk boarded, they discovered evidence of 2 separate boarding parties that had come before them, scorched into a sealed door. One party had tried to force something out, the other had tried to keep it locked in. That detail matters more than it seems on first watch, because it tells you the crew of the Griffin knew exactly what they were dealing with before it consumed them. This wasn't an ambush. It was a slow-motion collapse that the crew watched coming and tried and failed to contain. The medical log Spock uncovered confirmed the ending was violent, not accidental. Nobody aboard the Griffin died of disease or malfunction. They died from stabbings, strangulation, being forced out of airlocks into open space. In other words, the crew didn't lose a fight against an external threat. They turned on each other, and that's the real horror hiding inside this episode. The Griffin's evil doesn't need weapons or claws. It needs trust, and it turns that trust into a blade. Which brings us to Harper. Officially, Rose Harper was the Griffin's chief security officer, the same role La'an holds on the Enterprise. That's not a coincidence, and the show wants you to notice the parallel immediately. But here's the unresolved part. The episode never tells us definitively what Harper actually is. Is she a ghost, the lingering psychic residue of a woman who died protecting her crew from whatever infected the ship? Is she the entity itself, wearing Harper's face because it found her identity useful? Maybe even because Harper was the last person strong enough to resist it? Or is she something else entirely? An intelligence with no true form that simply borrows the dead to speak? The video logs La'an found offer the clearest hint. Harper recorded herself describing her crew as infected, insisting she couldn't let whatever was happening spread to the rest of Starfleet. That's someone trying to contain a threat, not become one. And yet, over time, those same logs stop being general warnings and start speaking directly to La'an, as if Harper somehow knew, 9 years in advance, exactly who would eventually walk through that door. That's not something a simple ghost does. That's something aware, patient, and deliberately targeting. So here's the most likely read, based on what the episode actually shows rather than what it states outright. Harper wasn't simply killed by the entity. She may have become its final vessel, or its final voice, after resisting long enough to try to warn others. The entity itself, whatever caused the Griffin's crew to spiral into paranoia and violence, was never given a name, and that's intentional. Naming it would turn cosmic dread into a monster you can fight with a phaser. Leaving it unnamed keeps it exactly what the Griffin incident wants it to be, something closer to psychological infection than alien invader. It doesn't attack bodies first, it attacks the fault lines already sitting inside a person's mind, then lets them do the rest. And that's exactly what happened to La'an. The entity didn't invent her fears, it found them already there and pulled the thread. Ever since being transformed into a Vulcan last season, La'an has been quietly carrying the fear that the change didn't just alter her biology, it may have loosened something else, the recessive augment DNA inherited from Khan himself. She's been faster, stronger, less affected by pain, and increasingly more isolated from the people around her. The Griffin didn't create that fear, it just made her watch it play out to its worst possible conclusion. That's why the hallucinations hit differently for La'an than they did for Kirk or Spock. Kirk's ordeal was about guilt, chasing the sound of a child he believed was his son David, a gutting reminder of the weekend he chose an admiral's approval over his own kid. Deeper fear that it's his Vulcan half, not his human half, that keeps. Spock's ordeal forced him to confront T'Pring again, and a much deeper fear that it's his Vulcan half, not his human half, that keeps costing him the people he loves. Painful, yes, but La'an's ordeal wasn't just about facing a fear, it was about becoming it. She's the only one of the three who didn't just imagine losing control, she actually lost it. She set the transporter to trap Ortegas inside herself, she lunged at Uhura with a blade, and in the one moment the Griffin incident refuses to soften, she drove that same blade into James Kirk's stomach. And it was real. He nearly died on that ship. Pike kept it out of his official report, quietly protecting La'an the same way he once protected himself, sharing a personal story from his own childhood about something otherworldly that haunted him. It's a kind gesture, but kindness doesn't erase what happened, and the final image of the episode makes that painfully clear. As the Griffin drifts away under tow, La'an looks out and sees Harper's ghost staring back, mouthing for her to keep the secret. That's not a jump scare for shock value. That's a warning. Whatever La'an went through on that ship didn't end when she beamed back to the Enterprise. It followed her home. Here's the uncomfortable question the show is quietly asking. Did the entity aboard the Griffin create a monster inside La'an, or did it simply prove one was already there, waiting? Because if it's the second option, no away mission will fix that. No debrief, no cover story, no kind captain shielding her from consequences will change what's sitting under the surface now. There's a reason Starfleet apparently has its own version of the X-Files, an obscure unit called Division 12, quietly introduced earlier this season and formally revealed here, tasked with investigating exactly this kind of unexplainable phenomenon. They arrive at the end of the episode to tow the Griffin away, and it's tempting to hope they'll return with answers. But don't count on it. The entire point of an episode like this is that some horrors in the Star Trek universe don't come with a tidy scientific explanation. Sometimes the not knowing is the horror. So think about that ending for a second. Harper waved, not screamed, not attacked, just waved, almost gently, like she and La'an now share something the rest of the crew doesn't. What do you think that gesture actually means? Is Harper warning La'an or welcoming her? Whatever the answer is, one thing feels certain. The Griffin may be gone, but La'an isn't done paying for what happened aboard it, and the ghost that followed her home isn't finished either. If this breakdown helped make sense of one of the creepiest hours Strange New Worlds has ever done, give it a like. Subscribe for more deep dives every time a new episode drops, and let me know in the comments what you think Harper really is.